Good. I would like to run through a few technical details before we start the event itself. First of all, please double click on any virtual table in the background of your screen to join any networking group. Each of these networking groups have different themes on it, so it helps you to find the right kind of people that you like to meet during the networking session. There are virtual tables with different themes, and please say hi and introduce yourself when you join any virtual table group. We encourage you to use your webcam and microphone to enhance the networking experience. Last but not least, you can also connect your LinkedIn to your Remo profile to facilitate more conversations after the event. My name is Zilin Sim. I'm from the Singapore Economic Development Board, and I will be moderating much of the sessions today. Feel free to reach out to any of the speakers over LinkedIn if you have any further questions. Here is the program for today, starting off with sharing by the Singapore Economic Development Board, followed by presentations by Oxford, and then a panel on the entrepreneur's experience dealing with COVID-19. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Wei Chen Chua, who is EDB's Regional Most Vice, share some long-term growth opportunities in Southeast Asia beyond COVID-19 and how the government is supporting businesses during this very challenging period. So, Wei Chen, are you on the line with us? Just waiting for Wei Chen to come in. Just a second while I get Wei Chen on the line. Hi, Wei Chen, are you there with us? Hi, Wei Chen. I think you were muted.
Can you hear me now?
Are you there, Wei Chen? Yes, perfect. Okay, over to you. I'm going to turn on my screen. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not sure if you can see my face, but somehow. In any case, I think it's not so important for you to real time, but hopefully I can turn on the camera for some networking later on. And I'm the Vice President for EDB's European operations. And today I'm just going to provide you with a brief overview on the region's growth prospects and why we think that Southeast Asia remains a market that one should pay attention to, and certainly also to create a bit more awareness of the region to the audience today, give you a flavor of the tech scene as well as set the stage for the presentations that follow after. To just give you a brief introduction of our organization, we are the Singapore Economic Development Board, and we are the lead agency that plans and executes economic strategies for the country. Ziling, if you don't mind just toggling to the next slide, it gives you a flavor of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So firstly, we enhance the business environment. We ensure that policies and investments into research and human capital make Singapore a great place for businesses. At the same time, we also look into industry development. That means building the ecosystem for sectors such that companies from a particular sector can plug and play in the Singapore ecosystem and succeed. And last but not least, we play the role of investment promotion, which is to promote Singapore as an investment destination for companies. I won't talk too much about about Singapore today, but I wanted to give a quick overview on the region. And if I may go to the next slide, which just shows you a very top-level factoids on the region. It is a region of 11 countries, 650 million people, and we collectively an economy of $2.8 trillion USD. And here, when we look at the next slide, we'll see that the region is projected to grow to become the fourth largest economy by 2030. And obviously the projections might be revised, but based on current projections, we are very optimistic that you'll collectively become the fourth largest in the world. And one of the big reasons for this growth is demographic. And if you can see the stats, to about 70% of the population are under the age of 40, right? And that gives a lot of optimism in terms of the youthful workforce that we are seeing coming into the market. At the same time, we are also seeing the growth of the middle class from one-third of the population 10 years ago, where we are expected to see it grow to two-thirds in the next 10 years. Okay, Zilin, could you just go to the next couple of slides and just to the one with the graph, to the next one. Yeah, okay, so I thought to pick up this following graph from Asia Partners, a research paper that was released last year. And if you look at where Southeast Asia is right now, its income levels are at about 4,600 USD. And when we talk about middle class, a lot of people question the term. The term is sometimes lost to us. But if we zoom in and look at the numbers and we draw the number back to a particular country that's really familiar to all of us, China, and look at when China hit these income levels, it was about 12 years ago or so, in 2007. And we all know what happened in China in terms of its growth over the last 10, 15 years. And on this same trajectory, we would see Southeast Asia mirror the type of consumer and business spending of China in the coming years. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the opportunities. But I think if we zoom into the tech ecosystem now in the next slide, the Southeast Asia tech ecosystem today is largely defined by the internet economy. And if you want to go into more details about the internet economy, I'll encourage you to look at Temasek and Google's paper on the Southeast Asian internet economy and what is valued today. But by and large, I think I wanted to talk about this because today's tech sector in Southeast Asia is very much centered around B2C businesses. When you look at the internet economy, and many of you would be quite familiar if you have come to this region, the unicorns in Southeast Asia are very much playing in the space of e-commerce, ride-hailing, online travel, and gaming. And that's the first wave of tech companies that we see coming into the markets. But I think when you look at the up-and-coming sectors, which are illustrated on the four bubbles on the right, you would see that these are new sectors that I think will be disrupted or impacted by startups and tech companies, be it in financial services, education, healthcare. And very interestingly, if you look at some of these sectors, they are the ones that are very pertinent in today's environment with COVID in the backdrop. So I think some of these sectors would experience tremendous growth during the COVID, the time when we are experiencing challenges with the COVID pandemic. But that said, I think I wanted to point out that a particular group of opportunities that have not been quite spelled out by many is the B2B opportunities. And we are having many conversations with companies who are looking at coming into Southeast Asia to do B2B sales. And that means selling to enterprises, selling to corporates, whether it's the enterprise solutions, whether it's cybersecurity. And I think that is a market that is untapped at this moment. And I think if some of you are playing in that space, do try to find out more about the Southeast Asian market with respect to B2B opportunities, because I think that is really the next wave that we are looking out for. Quickly touching on the VC funding scene on the next couple of slides, just a quick overview on where funding is. And I know, we will be all very, very interested in how the number of deals will be like in 2020 because of the challenges we are all facing. But the number of deals in Southeast Asia last year hit a record in 2019, even as the total capital decreased from 2018. But I see a lot of optimism in this despite the total capital coming down. If you go to the next slide, it shows you the breakdown of deals that have been captured over the last few years. And you would see that even though total capital seen in those deals have come down, it's largely because the mega deals that unicorns are closing have come down, but the number of deals that are happening on earlier stages have gone up. So I think that that represents a very healthy VC funding scene in Southeast Asia. And from a few conversations I've had with VCs, few interviews I've read, okay, many of you might challenge that, but VCs have said that they remain open for business. And in a couple of conversations I've had, they obviously they will become more picky, but they do have funds that they, and capital that they will need to deploy, having raised them in the last couple of years. So I think that deal making will still happen in Southeast Asia. And just a very last point about, to touch on COVID on the next slide. I think I wanted to just share with you about the thinking behind Singapore government's support for businesses and individuals. So first and foremost, fiscal support to companies and individuals amounting to over $60 billion. And a couple of main principles here. I think, specific to businesses, we have committed to helping companies maintain capacities in our sectors, meaning keeping the production capacity going and running, even as demand has fallen or supply chains have been disrupted. And most importantly, and I think that's what companies want to hear, is we want to keep the capabilities within the workforce. And you would see that we have tried to do so with the jobs support scheme on the right, where we are supporting wages of all companies for local employees at a 75% support rate, obviously capped at a certain amount, especially for this period where Singapore is facing, or we're going through a certain form of lockdown that has been introduced by the government to slow down the spread of COVID. 75% of wages have been supported for the month of April and May. And for the rest of the year, 25% of the wages will be supported by the government to help companies keep their workforce, keep employment in those companies. And we hope that that would allow companies to retain some of the expertise that they want to keep for the upturn. So I think I'll stop here, and I wanted to just set this context in terms of opportunities in Southeast Asia, but certainly looking forward to some of the guest speakers who will be sharing more of their insights and perspectives. And I welcome questions after this. And do feel free to reach out to me over the networking later or over LinkedIn. Thank you. Over to you, Ziling.
Thanks very much, Wei Chen, for sharing on how companies can be getting support from the government during this challenging period. I also like to make sure that we keep in touch, and if you have any questions, do come over to the tables and talk to us later. We can share more details of the different schemes as well as the links to the region. Welcome, Wei Chen. You're back after your presentation. But
okay, so somehow you can put a face to the name now. Apologies for the technical challenges. Yeah.
That's now. May I please welcome someone who has lived in many parts of Europe and Asia, and who'll be sharing some detailed insights on how startups have actually grown in Singapore and Southeast Asia. So let's welcome Mr. Dario Acconci, who will be our next speaker, sharing very detailed information on how their companies have been dealing with this crisis and how they've been using Singapore for Southeast Asia. Dario, over to you, please. I'm going to turn on my cam so that it's all over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Celine. Thank you, Wei Chen. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, please go ahead.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. I am Dario Acconci. I am Managing Director of Oxford. We are an international corporate services provider. We are headquartered in the UK, but we have a substantial presence in Asia. And our main office is here in Singapore, together with other offices in China and in Hong Kong. In a nutshell, what we do is to assist all companies from all over the world, hand-holding them in their venture into Singapore by taking care of the company setup, the corporate compliance, the accounting, the tax, the immigration part of their investment into Singapore. Today, we will briefly share a journey on what it means to set up a business in Singapore, why you should consider Singapore the best or the preferred springboard when you want to venture into other markets. As Wei Chen was mentioning, ASEAN represents a huge opportunity. and more in general Asia. But it is very important to structure your investment into Asia from those jurisdictions that offer the best characteristic of security, certainty, and general framework. We will go then to understand which are the incentives, the help that the Singapore government is putting in place, generally before COVID and now also during the COVID time. I will start the presentation on a personal note. I arrived in Asia in 2003, working for an international law firm, and basically what we were doing is to assist foreign companies that had joint ventures or set up investments into Asia. I did spend my time between Singapore, Hong Kong, and China, and you remember what happened in 2003. In 2003, SARS struck the main cities of Asia. It was probably, it lasted shorter than what coronavirus will end up lasting, but it did hit very hard. And cities like Singapore, Hong Kong, and in China, it felt like the world was coming to an end. Asset prices were going down the drain. Businesses ran away, foreign businesses ran away, and other businesses failed. In general, it was a really gloomy moment. But then history taught us that what happened as soon as SARS left was probably the biggest and most intense economic boom cycle that Singapore, China, Asia in general had ever experienced. And I say this because I think there is a great opportunity now for foreign investors. I think Asia represents probably the biggest potential market, and therefore I would summarize in 2 words my suggestion for companies that are looking at Asia and at Singapore. And these are perseverance. Perseverance, because I think that you should not abandon your plans to come to Asia in this moment. Probably you should just simply plan a investment into Asia, which is probably leaner, more flexible, but you should not stop in your plans, because Asia will probably be the region of the world, and Singapore at the forefront, that will restart economic activities and will restart trading and growing and developing. And then resilience as a second word for those businesses that already arrived into Singapore and into Asia. Resist, because as I said, history has proven that Singapore and Asia will restart very quickly their activity. We have developed a tool called guidemesingapore.com. You can find all the information on company setup, tax, accounting, and immigration. It's very comprehensive, so please feel free to go and browse our website. Now, why Singapore? I usually divide jurisdictions in Asia between destination jurisdictions and crossroad jurisdictions. A destination jurisdiction is typically a country like India, China, Malaysia, Indonesia. So countries where it is envisaged that you would go and set up productions, greenfield projects, or markets that are big enough to represent a target market for your investment. A crossroad jurisdiction instead is a jurisdictions where all these destination jurisdictions come together and transact and conduct business, and jurisdictions where all the other Asian jurisdictions look at as an example, because the government is so progressive and so strategic in its view. Well, Singapore is, I think, the main example of these crossroad jurisdictions. It is strategically located at the main trade and shipping routes of the world, and is renowned as one of the most important transportation hub. Needless to say that Changi Airport is an award-winning airport and at the crossroad of the highest traffic cargo and passenger in the world. Foremost, Singapore is part of ASEAN, which is the free trade bloc of Southeast Asian countries. At a glance, the advantages that Singapore can offer: it has the largest investment treaty network, which means that if you decide to invest, for example, into a factory setup via Singapore, you will take advantage of the investment treaty that Singapore has, for example, with India or with China. And this means that your investment will be protected under the provisions of that treaty if anything happens in that country. It has a political and economic stability. It has policies to attract foreign investments with grants, R&D incentives or tax programs. It has a very large network of double taxation agreements, 70 double tax treaties, no capital gain tax, no dividends, and tax investments and incentives. All of these elements actually concurred to make Singapore the second best place to conduct business in the world. Sixth best to start a business, to enforce contracts. And why? Singapore is a common law jurisdiction. So you have the certainty, the efficiency of a common law jurisdiction when you decide to conduct or transact your either commercial transactions or investment transactions. Now, Singapore is, as I said, a crossroad, is a hub. Singapore is the perfect jurisdiction because of its legal framework, of the absence of red tape and its efficiency to be used as a hub to further invest into Asia. So as you see from this slide, if you're a foreign investor and you target to set up a big investment in ASEAN or in China, you might consider the advantages of having a Singapore vehicle. First of all, because you can use it as a trading vehicle for the productions or the products which you will manufacture in ASEAN or in China. Why? Because Singapore has a very favorable tax regime and has all these treaties set in place with so many countries. But then there are further advantages of setting up a trading holding vehicle in Singapore, because you have a buffer between your headquarters and your investment into an ASEAN country or in China, which sometimes might be tricky investments. These are jurisdictions where things are quite complicated, and therefore having that buffer element between your headquarters and your industrial investment is definitely something interesting. If you decide to set up in ASEAN via Singapore vehicle, the process will be streamlined and easier to implement. You want to dispose your asset, it will be easier to sell your companies in those jurisdictions if you just sell your Singapore vehicle. It can happen just in few days.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you move the banner at the bottom part of your screen? I think some of the viewers are looking at it. Thank you. Please go ahead. Sorry for that.
As another aspect and benefit, if you have a partner, an ASEAN partner or a China partner, you might consider Singapore as the joint venture jurisdiction. So to set up the company with your partner in Singapore, again, because you can take advantage of the legal framework of the common law jurisdiction, courts, mediation center, arbitration, which cannot be influenced by any, let's say, political or local influencing. So once we have set up the stage of why we consider Singapore as a perfect jurisdiction to land your expansion into Asia, we will look briefly at how to set up a presence in Singapore. Very simple. There are just few options. You can either decide to set up a private limited company or a branch office or a representative office. Most of the investors we assist decide to adopt the private limited company. It can be set up in less than 1 week. There are no minimum capital requirements. You just need at least one resident director, and it is a separate legal entity from your headquarters. Therefore, you enjoy the benefit of a limited liability. The branch office, instead, is an extension of the foreign entity, so it's not a separate legal entity. Liabilities incurred in your branch are liabilities of your parent company. Few companies decide to adopt this because they operate in specific sectors where the requirements from the Singapore regulator are quite high, and therefore they decide to use, for example, the capitalization of the mother company, and so on and so forth. Representative office is a very limited vehicle. It just allows companies to conduct market research in Singapore. It's like a window where you can look, you can see, but you cannot really interact locally. And it lasts up to 3 years. And thereafter, you have to move to either a private limited company or a branch office. Taxation in Singapore is streamlined. So we have a corporate income tax set at 17%. And as we mentioned before, no tax on dividend distribution or capital gains. The individual income tax stands at a progressive rate that ranges from 0 to 22%. But in addition to that, there are tax exemptions, which are applied across the board or applied to startup companies. So the tax exemption, which is applied across the board, in a nutshell, brings the taxation down from a 17% rate to roughly a 9-10% rate for the first 200,000 Singapore dollars profit you make in your company. The startup exemption goes even further and is between 6 to 8%, the tax rate, on a blended rate on the first 200,000 Singapore dollars. And it applies in case you have at least 10% held by an individual shareholder. Among the COVID-related budget measures, we have the tax rebate, whereby the Singapore government introduced a 25% of tax rebate capped at 15,000 Singapore dollars if you have a resident private limited company in Singapore. I just set out an example of the DTA, double taxation agreement. So if you think about it and you set your investment into Asia via Singapore, you will take advantage, for example, if you come from the UK, from the provisions of the DTA between Singapore and the UK. And then if you thereafter go to India, for example, you will take advantage of the DTA between Singapore and India. And typically, you will find that the benefits, tax benefits, for example, are great from using the network of Singapore DTAs. Just to give you an example, the UK Singapore DTA provides no withholding tax on dividends distribution when you distribute your dividend from Singapore to the UK, 10% on withholding tax in case of interest paid from Singapore to the UK, and 10% in case of royalties. In the absence of a DTA, the rates would be higher. IP protection. Singapore offers a very efficient solution for IP protection. As you can see, the only center outside of Geneva for arbitration and mediation from the WIPO, the governing body of intellectual property, has been set up in Singapore. In the table you have ahead, you have more or less, you have an idea of the timing that it will take for registration, adjudication of cases, and issuance of grounds and decisions. And this doesn't relate only to trademarks, but also to patents and registered design. A very interesting provision from the Singapore government is the R&D incentive tool. If you bring your R&D expenses into your Singapore vehicle, for every dollar spent, IRAs can grant, upon their consideration and evaluation, up to 250% of a tax deduction. So this gave you, as an element, generally the idea of how the Singapore government wants to transform the Singapore economic environment and society into a high-tech, high-level, high-skill society. And therefore, it implements policies to attract the best companies from all over the world to bring their R&D centers and skills into Singapore. As mentioned by Wei Chuen previously, the government has stepped in vigorously to support companies during the COVID crisis. He has already set out the main support that they have provided. We have set out in this slide the timeline. 3 consecutive budgets were rolled out between the 18th of February and the 6th of April, and they were targeted at supporting families, at supporting companies, and at supporting workers. These measures benefit local companies, but as well as companies with foreign shareholders, so subsidiaries of foreign companies. A special attention has been given to startup companies in this period, and therefore 300 million Singapore dollars have been allocated under the Startup SG Equity Program. All these programs substantially help enterprises to identify the business needs, to put the government and the business together, and to facilitate their approach into the market. The Job Support Scheme is the scheme that has been introduced to help companies retain employment and make this transition to the period following coronavirus by companies. Very interestingly, companies, clients have asked us during these months, and also EDB has noticed that a very common question for companies that are already here is how to use force majeure. Force majeure is an item, a clause that can be used in this period. Well, we are not a law firm, so I will just tell you what we have seen coming from our experience. So force majeure is literally superior strength and refers to unforeseen calamities and natural disasters. And this is a clause that often is found in commercial contracts. So can we apply force majeure in a COVID scenario? And under Singapore law, what we have seen is there are not too many precedents and case law onto how much weight the Singapore courts would put into applying COVID as a scenario whereby a force majeure clause would be adopted. Therefore, I think the most important thing for companies that are already here and are considering it is to speak with their lawyers and understand if in their contracts, their commercial contracts, whether sales or whether supply, defined broadly enough to include epidemic and pandemic. On the 7th of April 2020, having said this, the government has introduced legislation to ensure that temporary relief from the inability to perform contractual obligations was introduced in the system. And therefore, there's a full list that you can see at the lower end of our slide of situations where you can obtain freeze on taking legal actions for breach of certain contracts and other benefits arise thereof. There are also other legislations like the Frustrated Contracts Act together, and therefore an investor that is here should analyze a contract, understand the strength of its force majeure clauses, and verify which will act in his best interest against the Frustrated Contracts Act or the 7th of April 2020 Temporary Measures Act from the Singapore government. Thank you, Celine. Thank you, Wei-Chuan. For any question, please let us know.
Thank you very much, Dario, for sharing all this information. There are questions that EDB has been receiving over the last few weeks, so I think it's important to put it out there. Thank you, Dario, again. I'd like to now invite two of our panelists on stage, just making sure that they are with us right now. So our first panelist is someone who has established several businesses in the UK, and these businesses was UK's largest electronic security companies. His current role shapes the relationship between real estate and technology. He's the CEO and founder of Condeco, one of the foremost providers of workspace management technology. Please welcome Mr. Paul Statham, please. Are you here with us, Paul? Perfect.
Hi, yes.
Wonderful. Our next second panelist is an entrepreneur in 3 continents, created a business consultancy and entertainment content startup, and is also a key member of La French Tech Singapore. She has supported many initiatives to support the tech ecosystem. For example, the Women in French Tech community in Singapore. She has helped female talents across the region to become founders, investors, and managing directors. Please welcome Mrs. Amel Trigno, please. Thank you,
Good
Amel.
afternoon.
Wonderful. So thank you for being here with us today. To start, could we maybe start by saying a few words about yourself, please? Maybe Amel, you could start a few words about yourself.
So good morning or good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me today. So since the first years of my professional life, I'm working within the tech ecosystem, but with a business background. I have been a consultant for more than a decade, helping corporate to explore new businesses or how to pivot or to improve their existing activity with new technology, as cloud computing, IoT, digitalization, and so on. And when I moved to Hong Kong in 2013, I wanted to be on the other side and found my own startups, which I sold it just before coming to Singapore 3 years ago. So having those both experience as a consultant and as a former startup founder, I create Digital Mind Media, which now is helping startups to settle and to grow the activity in Asia. And as a volunteer, I'm a mentor at SMU Incubator, one of the top Singaporean university. And as you said it, Zéline, I'm one of the leader of La French Tech here in Singapore.
Thank you so much, Amel. Over to you, Paul. Maybe a few words about yourself, please.
Okay, yes, my name is Paul Statham. I'm the CEO of Condeco and founder. I suppose I would be described as a serial entrepreneur. I've been running my own businesses since leaving school. Condeco was founded 15 years ago. It was born out of the need to improve the way that we collaborate and we use real estate. And we started the business relatively small in the UK and have been growing it for the last 15 years. And I think that growth around the world as you open offices and you employ more people and your client base become more demanding has really given me and the company the ability to specialize in what is a very niche but fast growing field. Yeah, that's basically what I do and what Condeco does.
I wanted to ask you this question because using technology and great design to help companies, optimize their real estate is a key part of Condeco's growth strategy. But we know because of COVID, real estate is one of the main sectors that's taken a big hit by the COVID-19 situation. How are you coping with this situation? How are you dealing with it?
Yeah, real estate is a major challenged industry, but what we're seeing and our clients are communicating with us and on a constant basis is the need to understand how people are going to start to interact with the real estate again. Most certainly social distancing and contact tracing are key along with sanitation. We've now been working with our clients to ensure that they've now right-sized their buildings. So it's essential that on the return to work that is going to happen relatively soon, that they understand that you've got to redesign. The real estate market's been turned on its head, whereas it was very flexible, very turn up and sit down, find a space you want to work in. What's now happening is people are being very prescriptive about you must be 2 meters apart. You can't sit on the same floor as your colleagues. So suddenly what was a very free and laissez-faire approach to real estate is actually becoming very controlled. And it's not because of any form of authoritarian business leadership. It's because people want to remain safe. So we're introducing, and I know many governments and a lot of other companies are introducing contact tracing so that we monitor where people are in their buildings at any given time. But we're expecting the capacity to actually be challenged, because by giving people 2 meter spacing, you're actually going to have not enough space. So you're now going to have to ration visits to the office. Because if you have everyone turn up at the same time, you're not going to be able to do the social distancing.
Absolutely.
So what we're seeing is that we're seeing an industry that is reinventing itself by the hour, not even by the day anymore. It's literally looking at how do we get this proverbial quart into a pint pot. All these people are going to want to come back, but we can't allow them back into the office. So it's challenging. I think the long term, interestingly, and we'll move on, but I think the long term position, I think people will be working more remotely as we're doing today. This is a great example of how technology can allow people to collaborate without the need to have to be sitting next to each other. And I think that learning will be taken into the way we use real estate for decades to come. So I think we've seen a seismic change that isn't going to return after this.
Great point about social physical distancing and less traveling. And I wanted to build on this point and ask Amel, because you help a lot of startups that are traveling between Europe and Asia, and with the travel bans and lockdowns around the world, how has it affected you, the startup ecosystem that you work with? How are the startups overcoming these challenges when they can't travel anymore, when they have to do remote? Not all startups can do that. How are they dealing with that? Over to Amel for that.
So first, it was quick, sudden, and really global. In 2 months, the world has changed with, as you said, lockdown, travel bans. China. In February, it was Asia, and in March, it was the rest of the world. This crisis is incredible, and it's far worse than the 2009. So it's not only financial crisis, it's also an economic and sanitary crisis. And as Paul pointed out, the consequences will be sometimes really dramatic. So, for instance, we have already -3 in GDP. We have minus 20% of all the global world trade. We have pressure on financial market, and the startup can see it. We have an explosion of unemployment rates. It's really incredible, and no one was really prepared for that. So for startups, it's even more critical. So first, because they have a significant drop of their revenue on B2B, but not only, also on B2C, because nobody is going out, so nobody is buying anything. And unfortunately, the corporate has also anticipated this the violence of this crisis, and they immediately stop, reduce their activity, postpone or freeze any innovative project. And adding on that, the startups have a limited ability to further optimize because they have a lean cost structure and organization. So all this has conducted a high pressure on the cash. And some of the startups, and I'm sure among us, have less than 6 months of cash ahead of them. So
what are the onto the cash issue, right? What have you seen? What are the common mistakes that these startups are doing, and what are the better examples of how they are dealing with the challenges? Because you have cash flow, you have 6 months. What are the mistakes, and how are they dealing with this based on your experience?
So there are two types of startups. The one that they are preparing themselves for the after COVID, and the one who is really embracing and the change. So for me, if the first mistake, if your financial structure is not solid, so if you don't adapt, you will not survive. So the CEO must be really responsive and drive the way. He has to set up the crisis management with strong KPIs to analyze the external and the internal of the situation of his business. So, and my first advice, it will be to communicate continually, to reassure, to be transparent. To share your key figures, your plan, your action, all along the way, to everyone, to your team, to your stakeholder, to your client, to your supply, to everyone. So you need to be the pilot on board and to have a plan and to communicate it. And you will see the direct impact. You will keep involved your team. You will engage them. You will get full support of your stakeholders, shareholders. Sorry, you will have sometimes an understanding from your client or your supplier if you ask anything from them. And my second advice will be to work on the worst scenario, because I think it's a critical situation. So it's really to, even you have a lean cost structure, there are some possibility. And I also can give you some tips around it if you want.
I have a live question that's coming in. I think I'll open it up to both. Maybe Paul could start off this. Should startups be even considering international expansion now? For both who have started and those who have not started. The post-COVID world will be so different, and we have changed any go-to-market playbooks. Should they go ahead with expansion at this time? And if they do, what should they do to plan? This is for both of you.
Go on, Emil.
So the first point is if you are, what kind of, in which sector you are. For example, if we see that with this COVID situation, what has popped up is the digitalization and the disintermediation. So if you are, for example, a home-based learning education, the online education is booming. For example, one of my startups in my portfolio, Evidence B, they're developing digital modules for K-12 students based on cognitive science and on artificial intelligence. And of course, they are right now going internationally. Or if you are, even the doctors right now, as Wisheng point out, the healthcare is now going online. My parents, they have 72 and 73 years old. They are a doctor, and they use now teleconsultation to keep the relationship with their passion. And even the passion they are outside of even Paris, where they live. So, and look at the virtual panel. You were telling me that all the audience were all over the world. How could you imagine to organize this few weeks ago? So yes, you can go internationally, but it depends on which area you are.
Paul, for yourself, what do you think?
I'll add into that. I think if you're going to, I think international expansion, physical international expansion is obviously going to be a challenge because of travel bans and moving around. But I think partnerships and associations with other like-minded organizations for global expansion of technology projects are prime. You know, there are people at the moment that have got infrastructure in place. There are companies that might not have an immediate market demand for their product. It may be in travel, it may be in hospitality, but what they have is infrastructure, they have intelligence, they have staff. If you can find like-minded people who you can then leverage their regional or operational ability with your technology, then this could be a platform for global expansion. As Amel said, you know, as we're showing today, that we're able to communicate and collaborate. I think the one thing this crisis has shown everybody from all sizes is that we are able to go and lock ourselves away in a room and still communicate and operate. You know, companies are still functioning. It's really bad out there, and it is going to take a while to get back to normal. But companies are surviving, they're growing, they're finding ways to reinvent themselves. And I think collaboration will be virtual collaboration. The international expansion can be by leveraging relationships and introductions. So I think, you know, what you can't do is run home, lock the shutters and just wait for it to pass. I think it's really important to be out there finding what the next opportunity is. I think this is an entrepreneur's dream, that things are being changed. There's never a better time than when things are changing to find that market that really propels you and your products further. So look out for what, you know, think outside the box is a terribly overused saying, but don't just think about your own small world or your own small product offering. You know, it's times like this that actually can generate some of the most exciting and profitable liaisons business-wise.
Paul, I wanted to jump onto this point about the very changing world and trends that are changing so quickly. The COVID-19 business challenges are complex, and it's very challenging for just one company to deal with it alone. Are there certain initiatives that are cross-industry, you know, across the tech ecosystem, across the different industries that you would like to highlight that could really benefit all these startups which are struggling during this period? Maybe Amel, you could take a stab at this question as a start.
For example, at La French Tech, we have launched many initiatives all over the world because we have chapter in each countries. Perhaps I will point out two. One, of course, in Singapore, we have created a sort of dynamic mind sharing. We called it COVID Deed 2020. So each entrepreneur has to give 30 minutes, 1 hour of his time to help another one to cope with his challenges. So it could be contact, recommendation, new idea, anything basically. And we posted on our different WhatsApp group or on LinkedIn to advertise the initiative and to bring more people on board, and also the message. And the second one is really practical. It's La French Tech, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen. They have created an open public matching platform. And you have, from one side, the government, who needs specialized techno created by the pandemic, for example, for the airport, hospital, and so on. And on the other hand, you have the suppliers of all those tech solutions who can post all their details to explain their solution. And the link, perhaps we can share it on the chat later.
Yes,
if you want, Zilly.
on the chat. So it's like a procurement platform that aggregates all the business opportunities that startups need during this challenging period.
Yeah, but government, so it's a tenders.
Government.
Big
Tenders.
tenders.
Big
Yeah,
tenders.
so it's really specific and it's really niche. But all over the world.
I think we're talking. I see. So it's a global thing.
Yeah. So you have
Paul,
many challenges.
I have I see. Thank you, Amel. I just wanted to jump in as well because we have a question on from a person. I'm in real estate from Irene. She says, I'm in real estate. Overall, people are not keen to invest in real estate now. Aside from doing seeding activities, what could I do to bring in some cash flow? Maybe Paul, I think you do have some suggestions for Irene. Challenging question.
It is a challenging question, and although we optimize real estate, I think the market for real estate will continue to grow in demand over time. Obviously, once we get back into the office, I think what we're seeing in real estate is that there is going to be a change in the way that people use space. I think collaboration space is going to become even more of a premium. I think we are seeing that the return to the office is going to be about how you can meet safely with the correct distancing rules. So I think having real estate that is correctly designed, having real estate that is clearly a safe environment for people to work, I think will make it more attractive. I think what we're seeing is that safety and both personal safety and one's employees' safety is at the top of every real estate executive's thinking at the moment. So it's not about cost as such. People will eventually look at the cost of it, but at the moment, that's not the primary driver. The primary driver is all about safety. So my advice from what we're being asked, and we're seeing a massive spike in demand for solutions that can help people return safely to work. So if I were a large holder of real estate, I'd ensure that the way that I deliver it to my tenants and my potential tenants was all about how we are in control of that location, and we are going to do everything possible to keep your employees and your tenants safe. That's the key driver. And you also need to get ready for the fact that there will be some change in demand, but as we've seen in every financial crisis or change in business, as we saw after the financial crisis in 2008 through 10, is that yes, you'll see a dip in real estate, but real estate, as we all know, is a long-term investment. It's a 5-year plan, not a 5-month plan. And therefore people will reinvent the way that they interact with the space. So I think we've got to stay positive that the world will still want to collaborate and meet up physically, because although it's wonderful to do things virtually, there is still human beings, we still enjoy the physical element of meeting and talking. So I think there is a big demand to get back into the office, which is going to push the demand for real estate. So
yeah, running a bit short of time, so I'm going to just put in 2 quick questions here from the panel. The first one is a fundamental challenge of startups in the bioscience and tech field is a lack of understanding, adoption, and validation by clinicians and pharmaceuticals. How do we get more help? I think this question might be very, very technical. So I just wanted to open to a quick comments from maybe Amel and Paul, if you have any points. If not, we can also have this question after that. Over to you.
I'm not an expert, but I will be happy to introduce some expert on this topic. and a
Sure.
woman leader expert.
So once again, absolutely a fundamental challenge is the lack of understanding, adoption, and validation by clinicians and pharmaceuticals. I think it's a very specific topic. We might want to take it offline. Paul, do you want to have anything to add?
No, it's not it's not a topic I know a great deal about, unfortunately. So.
Okay. Another question, our patent is European. Is there a risk to a country like Singapore if we don't have any IP protection for that? Any risk?
We sell our product. We obviously, when we set up in Singapore many years ago, we got our legal teams to check the IP protection, and it's extremely strong. We have tested it through, as I say, only through the legal sources, and IP law in Singapore is as strong as any other IP law in the rest of the world. So we found it to always, that the legal side of it has been very easy to operate in, and the protections that you get afforded in Europe or the US are equally in force in Singapore. So I don't believe that as long as your patents and your protections are correctly established, Singapore would be a very safe place to operate.
Definitely, fully agree.
Last question here. What are the first cost cuttings by startups in this COVID situation? The first thing that you look at cutting?
Can I take this one and have 5 minutes? Or?
Yes, please.
I have only
not much time, I'm sorry, but
30 seconds.
The networking.
Huh?
Please, 30 seconds, 1 minute. Thank you.
Oh my God, 30 seconds. No, but for the expenses, for example, you have to stop straight ahead all the no essential activities straight ahead. You can negotiate everything. Last week, I had over the phone a tutorial, which is an edtech, and they have negotiated a reduction of 0.6 on the Stripe fees. You know, the Stripe is really multinational company now, and they can negotiate. So it's really important to negotiate and to ask. So before thinking about layoff, which is really costly, use the pay leaves, for example. It could be good because if the activity pick it up again, you will have your resources here. You can, and also you don't have to pay the pay leave if you unfortunately have to lay off your employees. You can use also the unpaid leaves when it's possible. You can use the salary cut, but propose perhaps a temporary for the higher salaries or for the management, or even a compensation if you are startups. Propose a stocks so that you will involve or engage your people. Ask your people to be versatile and flexible. Redeploy it to the main activities where you can generate more revenue. For the top line, my first recommendation is not to focus on prospect, but first to focus on your existing customers, which is really important, and try to keep them, because it's easier to invest on an existing customer because you already gained the trust. So it's easy. The promotion, be careful with the promotion. Don't use it only wisely on targeted clients, for example.
The discounts and all that.
Exactly. For the cash flow, you have to recover every penny. All your customer receivables has to be recovered as soon as possible. It's really important. So this is why the communication with your clients is so important. And you can propose. I saw that in with some startups. They propose a discount to recover everything. It could be interesting. You can even ask. One of my startups of my portfolio, they ask to increase the price due to the situation and to increase the volumes. So you can ask everything, even for your supplier also. And the big ones, you can ask discounts or to postpone the payment. So there is, and also you have
the best time.
Exactly, and even the government has. We can show us the government has a lot of Dario. They have a lot of grants, so you have to ask for it and quickly because it will go really, really quickly.
Paul,
ask a loan.
Are you doing the same thing as well? Are you looking at the similar points? Tough question.
Yeah.
Tough question.
Yeah, I would obviously use government from the COVID situation. Use the available government grants and subsidies and furloughing systems and staff protection, wage protection systems. But I think the key advice that I would give is that take time. Don't panic. Take a very long, hard look at your own business and the financials. You know, cash is going to be king in the post-COVID situation. If you haven't got cash, doesn't matter how good your idea is, you will not survive. So making sure that your cash flow and the cash you have available will stretch out to the point of re-engaging with your client base is essential. So if you know, yes, we don't want to lose staff, but you've got to cut everything but non-essential and make those cuts once, make them the necessary cuts, and then focus on moving forward. So you do need to, you know, luxuries and nice to haves are really will hurt startups. You can't do it. You know, it is, you won't find funding. It's going to come back very quickly. You know, good ideas will always find cash, but it's something that you just need to make sure you make your changes and have faith in your own product and your own business. And I think stick to the plan. You know, to deviate too far from the plan for startups and to knee jerk in different directions, you'll unbalance your business, and you should build a plan and then deliver to it, as you do in any good startup business. And have faith in yourself, and that would be my advice to entrepreneurs out there.
When you have only 3 months cash ahead, it's pretty complicated. Or 6 months.
Yeah, you've got to use it. Yeah, we 6 months, 3 months cash is a tough time when you've got COVID around you. But try and stretch that. You know, if you've got to make your cash last more than 3 months, otherwise you could be in trouble. But as I say, I think it's come back to there are lots and lots of government, particularly in Singapore. You know, we're a relatively large business, but we still got the Singapore government have supported our operation in Singapore, and every company has got access to grants and support. So, you know, that should be number one on the list, because it is a very supportive financial structure in Singapore, so you should use it.
Thanks so much. I think we're right out of time now. I'm going to break out the session for networking so that anyone who's watching this right now, you can come to the meet the speakers tables and ask more questions and continue your conversations. I also want to make 2 call outs. Enterprise Singapore also has a table. They're sharing on the largest startup competition and a startup conference called Slingshot and Switch in Southeast Asia. So go to the tables and find out whether their networks could be supportive to you. If you're a startup and you want to look at a in Singapore called Launchpad, please go to JTC's Launchpad table and they will share more information with you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and happy networking, and keep safe, and most importantly, hang in there while this situation goes up. Thank you, Amel. Thank you, Paul, for your time. Look forward to talking to you later. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.